Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Udis, and this show is over 30 segments in the series on the network of global corporate control. The network of global corporate control is a super entity that was identified by Vitali Glatfelder and Battiston of ETH Zurich. And I see that our teleprompter has now gone down. It was working perfectly. This is another sign that the network of global corporate control is paying careful attention to us. Good, I've got my teleprompter back. Some of the people, by the way, were wondering whether the DC TV people who are helping me produce the show had anything to do with what I had to say. And I'm happy to tell you that I've had nothing but support from my crew here. And today we've got Maurice Jackson, who's doing the producing, and Carmen Stanley is now helping out on audio. And we've got Kofi Tendai, who's here, the floor director, and telling me when I've run out of time and should stop ad-libbing. So you see, I do produce the teleprompters, and I've taken to putting the teleprompters out on the internet before the show because sometimes the live streaming gets interrupted, and for some reason it usually is in those areas where we're making disclosures that could be particularly embarrassing to the network of global corporate control. What is that network? It's been with us for a very, very long time, and when I say long time, I mean long time. It stretches back to the previous ice age. We know this because there's a map that shows the coastline of Antarctica, and Maurice, if you could show that map. It's the Hapgood map. It came to light in the 1500s in Turkey. But as I said, it shows the landmass of Antarctica, which couldn't have been drawn unless the ice weren't there. So this network has been doing a lot of mischief, and a number of us have been comparing notes about exactly what that network has been doing. And the study that was done from ETH Zurich shows that this group is, they're the Wall Street people. They're the ones that have been working with all of the banks to issue paper money, which is a scam. Ronald Reagan tried very hard to get rid of this network, and he was shot. One of the things that we have, I'm the lawyer for something called the Global Debt Facility, which is a trust that was set up at the end of World War II, and it contains the world's monetary gold reserves. When the Fed says that it has the monetary gold reserves, or the Treasury Department has the monetary gold reserves of the United States, that is a blatant lie. And I did something called a notarial protest back in February, and then after that notarial protest, which was unanswered, and under the rules of notarial protest, when you give an opponent the opportunity to answer and they don't answer, you've proven your case. And that was filed with in Bern, Switzerland, with the Universal Postal Union, which all of the countries of the world are members of. And then after that, as a lawyer, I went and filed financing statements, putting a lien on the Federal Reserve because, as I was mentioning about Ronald Reagan, he issued currency, paper currency, by the Treasury Department. When you have currency that's issued directly by the government, that means you don't have to pay the central banks. And those central banks are private, and they have absolutely no right to be charging us interest, because what those banks did, the Federal Reserve, is in the 30s, they went around gathering up gold from the elites, and they issued bonds in exchange for that gold, and those bonds carried interest, and that interest has been compounding since the 1930s, and the Global Debt Facility has over $200 trillion in face amount, and now with the compounded interest, it's worth more than $2 quadrillion. That means that all of the country debts are actually offset by this amount. Those central banks owe us more than we owe them. When you have problems with rescheduling country debt like Greece, and the central banks are calling for austerity measures, that is just a shakedown, that's just a scam. And a group of us are now working to end that scam. And when I say a group of us, who is that group? That's the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. That's also the G77, which is 134 developing countries. And that is actually the United States minus the Federal Reserve. And I can say this with perfect authority because we are now in something called interregnum. That means that the government is, it's not legitimate. Under the original Constitution, there's an Article 5 which says that when 2/3 of the state legislatures demand an amendment, that the Congress is required to convene an amendment. This is mandatory. And the U.S. Congress has fallen down on the job. We've reminded them many times. We're now in an interregnum. And in that period, we've been under military rule since 1861. And that's where we are. We're stuck, and we're not going to stay stuck very much longer. The Congress is acting without a mandate because we were very clear when we, the people, signed on to the Constitution that this was by consent of the people. The people have now shown by the terms of the Constitution that the consent is no longer present, and I'm going to be showing you a little bit later some of the public opinion surveys. Actually, that's going to be in the following week because I have quite a bit to tell you. That's because in the previous 2 weeks, we've been using the pre-recorded programs. So this live session is now brought to you. We've had 3 weeks to see how we've been progressing, and we've been progressing a great deal. What happened the evening after we had our last, that was live studio segment, that was on the 10th of November. On the 11th of November, we got really a very amazing email. That was an email from a person in Russia affiliated with the State University of Moscow, telling us about a new science called chronologia. This is, it's an interdisciplinary study. It consists of mathematicians, astronomers, and historians who have painstakingly gone back and reconstructed what our ancient history was and what they found out. And one of the methods that they used in doing this was to find out what the scientists at the time knew about ancient history. So reading the primary materials from Newton, it's fascinating. Of course, if you read Russian, you can see how this was constructed. We have on the website of the Moscow State University, we have the English translations, and it's a real eye-opener. What we found out is that there was a systematic effort to falsify history, to rewrite it. This happened, they've gone back and they've classified the different periods of ancient history, but this effort to falsify our history started in the 17th century, and they were falsifying from the 16th century and back. This obviously was done by the network of global corporate control, and this is another independent proof that we are being managed and told of a false reality by a group that thinks that we're too stupid to find out. And we're obviously not too stupid to find out. We have found out. We see the network of global corporate control, and we know exactly what they're doing. And when I say we, it is a group that stretches from one side of the globe to the other. And I wanted to read you the email that I got, which forwarded that website. Much respect to your organizational skills and time management. I think Carmen Stanley, who gets the last-minute teleprompters from me, would argue with that. But it says, I know it will take you months to decipher the info in the foregoing link. In the meantime, I do love what you do, and as a brother in truth, I love and respect you as a sister in truth. We have a long way to go, but truth is just a mere parsec above the horizon. All the best, Nick. And I went naturally to look up parsec to see what that means. It's a word which has actually been, it's a combination of two words. One of them is parallax, which shows that your perspective, what you see, really depends on your perspective. And that is that, for example, if you're living and looking at houses across the street, and then you go into your neighbor's backyard and look at those same houses, they're completely on the other side of each other. So you really do have to understand where you are, and in order to understand what it is that you're looking at. And parsec, that's a measurement of distance in astronomy. If you're an astronomer, parsec is not very far. But if you're standing on Earth, parsec is quite a distance. I've forgotten how many light years that is. But what this means is that we're looking very hard at our reality. And we see that our reality is not what it appears to be, because it's been systematically manipulated. And we know, of course, that the media, the mainstream media, and also at least 80% of the alternative media is owned by this network of global corporate control. And the news that we get is what the network of global corporate control wants to tell us. It's not what's actually happening. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier on in this series was that we were going to measure how effective we were in making progress in dismantling the network of global corporate control by seeing how many people understand that their reality that they're given in the media is false. So an editor of a major German newspaper has written a book, and this is now a bestseller in Germany. Udo Olfkotte edits the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, and I've got a website for you, which, if you want to try to get his book, I don't believe it's been translated into English, but the title of it is called Bought Journalists. And what Olfkotte wrote was that he was working to sell the CIA's lies, and that every significant journalist in Europe is doing the exact same thing. And I was reading a story that was written on an alternative media publication, Counterpunch, about Udo Olfkotte, and this story was actually giving a lot of grief to the National Public Radio program because it was not doing adequate reporting on the shooting down of the Malaysian aircraft MH17. Remember, on the 17th of July in 2014, that flight was shot down over the Ukraine. It was on its way to Kuala Lumpur. And so the Netherlands released its report, which was not really that adequate, but even though it was deficient, it did show that the missile that shot down that aircraft was, I forget the name of it, it begins with a B, but in any event, although it was of Russian manufacture, it was not shot down by the Russians because that was an earlier version. If it had been used by launched by the Russians, it would have been the updated version. This was a version that the Ukraine military used. The separatists didn't have the technical means to fire that missile. So this was shot down by the Ukrainian military. And what I did was I criticized Counterpunch, because I said that if Counterpunch wanted to talk about accurate reporting, they would have reported a little more than what was going on with that failure to talk about the Netherlands report. They would have mentioned something about the global debt facility. They would have mentioned something about the network of global corporate control. So this counterpunch is pulling its punches. And when I made that point, it went viral. And when I say something goes viral, it's not something that you're going to find out by looking at the social media, because many people have reported that not only is there underreporting, but when they themselves try to retweet something or forward it, it's not something they can do. So people using even word of mouth are getting through, because what we're talking about when the Russian State University tells us that our history has been systematically falsified, this is something that people want to know. They want to know not only that our history has been systematically falsified, but that there is a network of people who are giving each other information, and we are going to persist in giving each other information, because we resent very much that there is a group that thinks we don't deserve to know what the reality is. One of the other reasons that I wanted to bring this subject up to your attention is because I actually went to Holland in November. I did this spur of the moment. Some things you just can't account for. I called an old friend who I hadn't called for, at least 2 years, and I found her family by her bedside. She was on her deathbed. And so I just jumped on a plane and I got there before she died. And I just wanted to say goodbye. And I was very fortunate that I managed to get there just in the nick of time. And she was conscious, and we had a brief visit. It was very moving, and one of the reasons that I particularly wanted to go there is because that family, they stood by me. They became a second family to me. I was in my 20s in Holland, and without that family, I would have been just adrift. And it was really especially nice to talk to Wies's daughter, Sandra, because Sandra was telling me that when, there's a 15-year age difference, and she was telling me that my being a student at the University of Amsterdam had meant something to her. And in any event, so I figured after I was in Holland, I might as well stop by the Ministry of Finance and talk to them directly about what's going on. And because I speak Dutch, I've managed to stay in contact with some of the groups, some of the political parties even, and so they know, and they've been trying to find out why their government does not want to accept the gold that's on offer to them. The other point of information about the Netherlands is that that's where the International Court of Justice is, and maybe you'll remember that it was the International Court of Justice that tried to steal the monetary gold reserves of all the countries of the world by giving a statement saying that Marcos's memoranda were no longer valid. Now, I pointed out to the International Court of Justice that they had absolutely no jurisdiction, because by the terms of the global debt facility, the courts have no jurisdiction over the assets in the global debt facility. And after, by the way, 2 or 3 days after the ICJ made that statement, the CIA then issued a memo relying on that. Well, after I made my statement, and when I made that statement, I said it was on behalf of all of the countries who were represented by the ministers of finance on the board of governors of the World Bank. When I went to the annual meeting and I met face-to-face with 2 ministers and also with the other 20 other delegations, I confirmed with them that I was speaking on their behalf. And I said, if I were to say something that was not on their behalf, that they were to correct me. They were to correct me in writing, and I would stand corrected. And I then went and I repeated this understanding to the missions of the countries that belong to the World Bank. There's 188 of them. So I spoke to their New York missions and also to their Tokyo missions. And you see, not a single one has come back in writing to contradict me. And I also went on record when there was a meeting in India of over 40 countries. I tweeted all of that. Nobody has retracted this. I'm stating this on the internet. Any country that feels that I am not the lawyer for the global debt facility, would they please say so in writing? And one of the reasons that you will see that you will not see any contradiction is because all of these countries recognize the validity of the power transition model that came from the U.S. Department of Defense. They know that this will plunge the world into World War III. And they also know, because of this power transition model, that the chance that we do not end in World War III is over 90%. And that is because there is a coalition of countries which is taking down that network of global corporate control and all of this mischief that this network does, including turning off the teleprompter. They're just spinning their wheels because this is a very real coalition, and we are down to business. And when I say we are down to business, you can see on the internet, if you look at the archives to this program, people are speaking a lot about what needs to happen, and one of the debates is whether there's going to be an accounting by the elites that have been withholding the gold that belongs to humanity. This gold is going to be used in a currency reset for replacing our paper currency. There's also going to be local currencies. That's actually much more important. That's going to create full employment. So what we have to do now is we have to organize ourselves. And when I say organize ourselves, I do not mean for you to go to the NGOs. That is because these NGOs have been corrupted. I've been trying to work with many of them. You name it. The League of Women Voters, the Association of AARP, whatever that stands for. I've gone to all of them. At the top, they are co-opted by this network. And so you have got to just reach out to your family, to your friends, to your immediate neighbors, and just educate yourselves. And get ready to follow the information that you're not going to be getting from the mainstream media, and you're not going to be getting it from the alternative media on the internet. You're going to be doing compare and contrast, and you're going to be educating yourselves. And then you're going to be working with your local government authorities from the grassroots up, and we're going to be cleaning up this rot, and we're going to be getting rid of the network of global corporate control. And we're not going to be putting them in jail, or we will not have a transition. We're just going to retire them. And we may say nasty things about them. We may tell them what we think of them, but we are not going to do any harm to them, or they will not transition. There will be absolutely no incentive for them to transition. And if we do not have a peaceful transition, we will all end up in the soup. I don't want to elaborate what kind of soup we're going to end up in, but the fact of the matter is that there's 90% chance that we will do brilliantly. And we're going to just replace our paper currency with gold. It's going to be minted very thin, put in like a plastic envelope, and the value of the currency is going to be what the face amount of the bill is. But the most important currency is going to be the local currency. You've heard this many times before. There was something else I was going to tell you about. I was going to tell you about the fact that the government of the Philippines was trying to steal some of the assets in the global debt facility. It's not just monetary gold. I've published a list of an inventory list. This is an incomplete inventory list. I was told that there's 1.7 million metric tons of gold. Don't forget, we've been mining gold for a very, very long time. but it turns out that there's probably considerably more gold. I've wanted to have an inventory of the assets in the global debt facility, and so far the U.S. military, most of these assets are in the Philippines, and so far the U.S. military has not allowed this to happen. There were supposedly some illegal transports from helicopters, but one of the things that I've learned recently is that there are television cameras on the sites where the assets are buried, and that some of the people inside the World Bank, it's their job to monitor these TV cameras. So the prospects that the assets are largely intact are excellent. But we do need to have a systematic inventory. And one of the things that I've been talking about for many of the sessions is just how we're going to have a difficult time in bringing ourselves up to speed, because the professions that we would want to rely on are rotten. The accounting profession, they're rotten. They police each other, which is to say they let their brethren off scot-free, and at the very center there's absolutely no accountability. So we're going to have quite a chore to do an accurate inventory when we're going to have to be developing the professions and educating the professions at the same time. I also want to be talking about some correspondence that I had with the Secretaries of State. They're the ones that record the liens on the Federal Reserve, and I've also put liens on some of the agents of the Network of Global Corporate Control, including a lien on the Secretary of State for Chicago, because Chicago tried to invalidate the lien on the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. And I cleared the letter that went to Jesse White with all the ministers of finance, and then I put a lien on Jesse White. And I've been talking to the Secretary of State for Pennsylvania, because I put a lien also on the chairman of Allied Barton and on the company Allied Barton, because Allied Barton are security guards and they are illegally preventing me from going inside the World Bank. One of the reasons I also wanted to go inside the World Bank was because on the 10th of December, there's going to be a book signing. Judge Breyer and the World Bank are going to be, and the Washington Foreign Law Society that I've been a member of for many, many years, they're going to be doing a book signing. And I asked them whether they cared to give an opinion about the courts in the United States, whether these courts are the courts that are guaranteed under the Constitution, or whether they're sitting in something called admiralty, and whether the judges have betrayed their oaths of office, because I have submitted claims to the companies that are issuing surety bonds. There are any number of defects in our legal system, and the legal profession hasn't bothered to even come to the point whether this is true or false. They're just not dealing with the substance. So I'm told now that it's time to wrap up. I want to thank you for listening to another segment of the Network of Global Corporate Control. We've been discussing the difficulty that the Network of Global Corporate Control is having in defending its false reality. They're even trying to steal our assets. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudis. Good evening. I'm your host, Karen Udis. This series on the network of global corporate control has been going on for over 6 months. You should read some of the comments on the archives of the show to see how far we've come. This segment will respond to Steve Ansel Haynes' tweet. And he said, "It's time to bring down these wicked people." First, some background information, then some stock taking. The network of global corporate control is a hidden super entity whose existence was revealed by 3 mathematicians at the Federal Institute of Technology, Vitali, Glatfelder, and Battiston. The same directors serve on interlocking boards of the 43,000 transnational companies on the capital markets. This means that they have 10 times their economic weight by the clever way they secretly grabbed power. All the central banks are really one bank, and they think they have the right to corrupt our politicians, to buy up our media, to print worthless paper money, and to rip us off. And they also think that they're above the law. Now, the reason that they think that is because of the legal profession. I've been showing the dishonesty in the legal profession, which is hiding this corruption. In a week, Stephen Breyer is holding a book signing together with the Washington Foreign Law Society. I asked the Washington Foreign Law Society to acknowledge that the United States has been under martial law since 1861, that Congress has been extending a state of emergency to enable war powers, and that people who have paid off mortgages on their land, homes, cars, and other property do not have title. The states are providing mere warranties of title, and that federal judges are not presiding over the courts that are guaranteed to us under Article 3 of the United States Constitution. Instead, the judges have betrayed their oaths of office, and they're administering admiralty law courts. I received an email asking me why the courts were not required to tell the truth, and I was able to show what happened in my case where I bought a World Bank bond and sued in federal court. I told the District Court and Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia about hidden secret contracts that were on the signature lines of bank cards, and the judges in my case simply stonewalled. And you can look up the records to see what their response was. The judicial conference that's supposed to be supervising the courts ignored 188 ministers of finance who settled my case. The American Bar Association, the International Law Association, and the Washington Foreign Law Society, as well as insurance companies that issue surety bonds on the oaths of office of the federal judges, they all refused to acknowledge the corruption. So after I finished providing the documents and the correspondence with all of these organizations, I closed my tweet by saying, "You are incorrect that there is enough integrity in the legal profession for an admission, because there is not. Instead, confidence in the judiciary has plummeted. The facts speak for themselves now." And we have some polls that document this. Chapman University polled Americans about what their biggest fears are. And nearly 60% of them feared corruption in government. And if you could show the clip, the slide that shows that study. That's right. Thank you. And for those people that are having a hard time viewing the fine print, I put the teleprompters up on the internet, and when we archive this show, you'll be able to find that slide and that study. I also wanted to show a clip of a Princeton study. Several weeks ago, we spoke about the Princeton study, which shows that Congress will only listen to the network of global corporate control. They have absolutely nothing to, they pay no attention to the people in the United States. And so I'd like to show you the video that discusses this study.
For the last few years, I've had this sense that everything I learned as a kid about how America's government works is completely wrong. But I had no idea how bad things actually were until I saw this one graph. Researchers at Princeton University looked at more than 20 years worth of data to answer a pretty simple question. Does the government represent the people? Now, this is what they found. This axis here represents public support for any given idea. On the left, at 0%, are ideas that not a single American wants. On the right, at 100%, are ideas that everyone supports. This axis represents the likelihood of Congress passing a law that reflects any of these ideas, from a 0 to a 100% chance. On this graph, an ideal republic would look like this. If 50% of the public supports an idea, there's a 50% chance of it becoming law. If 80% of us support something, there's an 80% chance. You get the idea. Now, most Americans would probably agree that, with a few exceptions, we should be as close to this ideal as possible. Unfortunately, the way America actually works doesn't even come close. Take an idea that nobody supports, literally nobody, and it has about a 30% chance of becoming federal law. Now, take an incredibly popular idea, the most popular idea this country has ever seen, and there's also about a 30% chance of it becoming law. This means that the number of American voters for or against any idea has no impact on the likelihood that Congress will make it law. Put another way, and I'm just going to quote the Princeton study directly here, the preferences of the average American appear to have only a minuscule, near zero, statistically non-significant impact upon public policy. So if you've ever felt like your opinion doesn't matter and that the government doesn't really care what you think, well, you're right. But there's a catch. This flat line only accounts for the bottom 90% of income earners in America. Economic elites, business interests, people who can afford lobbyists, they get their own line. Look at how much closer their line is to the ideal. When they want something, the government is much more likely to do it. And when they don't, they have the power to completely block it from happening, no matter how much the rest of the country supports it. They get what they want, and guess who ends up paying for it? We pay for it with the most expensive healthcare in the world. We pay for it with a tax code that's a complete mess. We pay for it with internet that's slower and more expensive, with wasteful spending, a floundering education system, a catastrophic drug war, and 1 in 5 American children born into poverty. Almost every major issue we face as a nation can be traced back to this graph. How does this happen? Well, just follow the money. Right now, it's perfectly legal to buy political influence in America. Here's how it works. Let's say a big bank wants a law that would force taxpayers to bail them out again if they repeat the exact same reckless behavior that crashed the global economy in 2008. Not exactly the most popular idea with the public, and Congress knows that. That should be the end of it. But that's where the money comes in. It's perfectly legal for our bank to hire a team of lobbyists whose entire job is to make sure that the government gives the bank what it wants. Then those lobbyists can track down members of Congress who regulate banks and help raise a ton of money for their re-election campaigns. It's perfectly legal for those lobbyists to offer those same politicians million-dollar jobs at their lobbying firm. Then, those lobbyists can literally write the language of this new bailout law themselves and hand it off to the politician they just buttered up with campaign money and lucrative job offers. And it's perfectly legal for those politicians to take the lobbyist-written language and sneak it through Congress at the last second. So now you've got a law that greatly benefits the banks, and the whole process can start over. This is how a bill becomes a law. A special interest hires some lobbyists, those lobbyists collect campaign contributions, offer jobs, and then write the laws that Congress then passes to help those same special interests. This happens every day on every single issue with politicians of both parties. In the last 5 years alone, the 200 most politically active companies in the United States spent $5.8 billion influencing your government. Those same companies got $4.4 trillion in taxpayer support. And that's trillion, with a T. And that's just the top 200 companies. Never mind every other special interest, every union, every trade association, and every billionaire. Every single one of them can use their money to buy political influence. You know, there's this idea out there that this only became a problem after the Supreme Court's Citizens United decision in 2010. But the data goes back almost 40 years, and the results are clear. Corruption is legal in America.
Science and technology has a lot to say about the network of global corporate control. I got an email from Mike Breakey, an engineering physicist who minored in nuclear engineering. I answer all of my emails, and maybe you can show my email address for people who have questions that want to contact me. Thank you. Mike started off our email correspondence with a riddle. He said, "As I studied your YouTube videos, you often discussed the author of the 1900 Wizard of Oz, Lyman Frank Baum, and possible attempts to provide audiences a glimpse of the global elites behind the curtain. In recent years, I've stumbled across evidence of another icon author from the 40s and 60s that was frustrated upon learning of an epic perfect crime unfolding before her that she dare not publicly denounce or expose. The author's deep-throat informer was so knowledgeable on the capabilities of these powerful international elites, she fully understood these perpetrators controlled the White House and even the national media. This icon author concluded that her only option was to inform future generations of the treason destroying America. Thus, this author provided an epic-coded novel from the late 1950s, decades before Dan Brown's Da Vinci Code. This author knew the importance of gold and might even be one of your favorite authors. I suspect you can guess whom I am speaking of." So I wrote back, "Was it Harper Lee and To Kill a Mockingbird? Her deep throat was Truman Capote." And so after that, Mike Breakey sent me another email, which was in time to celebrate the 52nd anniversary of John F. Kennedy's assassination on November 22nd. And in his email, Mike told me how the United States, under JFK's presidency, had developed geothermal atmospheric liquefied thorium, that's called GALT, chemical reactors. And the network of global corporate control didn't like that. So they disbanded the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, along with two government energy committees, the JCAE and the AEC, to kill this technology before it could be commercialized in the early 70s. Instead, we used nuclear energy that was developed only for submarines because it is unsafe in large plants. Mike also forwarded information showing how NOAA has been falsifying weather data. And maybe you can show the chart. Thanks. And Lamar Smith, a Texas Republican and chairman of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, has published an article about why Congress needs this data. And according to Mike Breakey, the reason that NOAA doesn't want to reveal this is because it's been falsified. They're trying to show that we've got a problem, which is not the problem we have. We do have a serious problem, according to Mike, but it's going in the opposite direction. Now, I'm not able to second guess all of this information. I think it's quite likely that the network of global corporate control is able to exert sufficient pressure to have that data falsified, because much of what we know as news is also falsified. we simply need to find our own ways of finding out what the reality is, because the network of global corporate control is giving us a lot of rubbish instead of accurate information. One of the things that the mainstream media has refused to deal with is whether there was an attempt to nuke Charleston, South Carolina on October 7th, 2013. And what happened right after there was a detonation, an explosion off the coast of Charleston at that time, was two senior military officers were dismissed without following personnel policies. That was Tim Giardina, Vice Admiral Tim Giardina, and Major General Michael Carey. And what Michael Breakey had to say was that he wanted to go back and double check my facts. So he did some investigation, and what he found out was that it turns out that the seismograph records, that there were no seismograph records, that somebody had shut down our seismograph machines at the time of that detonation, which is quite a discovery to make. And if you go and look at the teleprompter, you'll see some links, and you can find the announcements that Breakey found for us. And he also pointed out that those people that did follow the records of the explosion showed that this was not an earthquake. It would have been an earthquake at 4.5 on the Richter scale, but because earthquakes usually start off slowly rather than explosions, we can see that this was exactly what happened. The nuke that had been transported for the citizens of Charleston, these officers, rather than following their orders, simply detonated in the ocean. This shows the network of global corporate control, that they are not in control of the U.S. military. The U.S. military is loyal to the citizens. They know that we know that there is a power transition in train. Right now, we are talking about this power transition. What is going to be happening is these agents of the network of global corporate control that think they have the right to surrender military might in the United States unilaterally and drive this country into a ditch. They're planning on crashing our Federal Reserve notes. Those aren't our Federal Reserve notes. Those are the Federal Reserve's Federal Reserve notes. Instead, the United States is going to be taking its international monetary gold reserves that are under the administration of the Board of Governors of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund. We are going to be minting our own currency. In the interim, we're going to be issuing the Treasury dollars that are held in the global debt facility that were printed by Ronald Reagan. And I have news for you. Ronald Reagan, his campaign funding, he had a lot to thank Ferdinand Marcos for. And it was Ronald Reagan who commissioned the study that showed that 100% of our income taxes are leaving the country. They're going to the Federal Reserve, which is not a government institution. It's not even in the United States. Those reserves are going to the city of London, and then they're transmitted onward to the Vatican. That's where our income taxes go. And it was the Grace Commission that Ronald Reagan set up that showed this. And we can, anybody that wants to read the Grace Commission report, just send me an email and you can read it. So we are not going to be driving our country into a ditch. We know exactly what that network of global corporate control had in mind. And as I said, we are in a coalition with the rest of the world. Nobody wants to be paying interest on country debt, which is a scam, when it turns out that the network of global corporate control owes the world's citizens a lot more than we owe them. So this scam is up. The only real question we have is how to do a proper transition, a peaceful transition, a smooth transition, because of something called the multiplier effect in economics. If we were to fire all of the people that work for the network of global corporate control overnight and just tell them to go and see how they can feed themselves, that was what they actually had in mind for us in another dark age. If we did that to them, it wouldn't help us any. What would happen is, because of the multiplier effect, we would go into a tailspin. We have to find a way to transition smoothly, and we know how to do that. And the way to do it, and we've been talking about this for a number of weeks, the way to do this is to retire the people in the network of global corporate control, not to throw them in jail, just to get them gently out of the way. We can call them names. We can write books about them. We can hold them in disregard. But it's going to be peaceful. We're not going to be punishing them. Otherwise, they will not step aside. They will not allow us to have a peaceful transition. And so we will be spiting ourselves to give ourselves the luxury of revenge. That's not a good bargain. And I wanted to show a graph of that. It's a rowboat where you've got the people at the top saying, thank goodness that the hole is at the other side of the boat. That's a pretty good way of illustrating exactly where we are. We've got to just allow ourselves to let these people retire. They don't have to retire gracefully, but they do have to retire without punishment, or we will not have any progress. And they actually have a lot of incentive to retire, because many of them are being murdered systematically, because the network of global corporate control has something called bank-owned insurance on their lives. And when the network of global corporate control runs a little short of cash, they just murder these corporate executives. They do it in the most underhanded of circumstances. Some of these people are young and had no reason to expect their lives to be cut short. So really, I'm assuming that a number of the elites are paying careful attention. I went to Holland last week, although by the time you hear this video, it will have been 3 weeks ago. And after I visited the Ministry of Finance in The Hague, I went to a concert. At that concert was a member of the elite. I went to the concert an hour early, and this person was there and sat next to me. And I didn't really have very much to say to him when he sat down, but during the intermission, it seemed that he wanted to talk, so I spoke with him. And he was the one that told me that we were actually across the street from the church where the royalty in the Netherlands is baptized or married. And then we talked a little bit about how it was that in the Netherlands International Court of Justice, there was an attempt to steal the monetary gold reserves and the other assets that belonged to all of humanity that were set aside at the end of World War II. And we talked about whether there could be peaceful transition and what the terms of the amnesty would be. And I think, there's no way of telling whether this was just a coincidence that this person wanted to speak with me. But in any event, there is a dialogue underway, and the dialogue will be continuing in the archives that I post following these programs. There's an active debate, and many people have caught on to the fact that it's really up to us whether we want to preserve our world, and if we do, we have got to make room for a smooth transition, and the only way to accomplish this is for the people in the seat of power to know that their time is up, that enough people know what it is that they've been doing, and they have no right to continue to do this. And when I say they have no right to continue to do this, that is because the world's assets belong to the world's people. They're administered by the Board of Governors of the World Bank and the IMF. That's why those institutions were created. And we found out, and we know exactly how to access those assets. That's because the institutions, the World Bank and IMF, are run by the Board of Governors, not by the Secretariat. We've made this very clear to the Secretariat, and Jim Kim and Christine Lagarde are now bankrupt. We haven't taken their homes. We will take their homes if they do not retire. It's very clear. And some of the people that were helping me on the commercial liens, this is a group effort, and other people that are expert in commercial liens are now advising me because, as I said, we are all working on this problem together. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about, if there's time, is how the network of global corporate control tries to hide the documents that back up everything that I'm saying. So I had printed on the internet some responses to an article that was it was on how the Congress was planning on auditing the Fed. And the first comment I said was that it was really a stupid proposal to ask the Government Accountability Office to audit the Fed, because the Government Accountability Office had already been asked to audit the World Bank, and it had backed out. It had just refused. It took many years for the GAO to admit that that's what it did, but it finally did. And it said, well, it couldn't get the World Bank to cooperate. But the fact of the matter is that GAO is a member of something called the International Organization of Supreme Audit Institutions. And the World Bank is also an auxiliary member of that. And it simply had to complain to INTSI, and the World Bank would have been asked to step down from that organization. So GAO had every means at its control to audit the World Bank if it had wanted to. So GAO, we already know, it's part of the federal government, which is bought and paid for by the network of global corporate control, because the Constitution of the United States has been replaced by a commercial entity. The United States has been incorporated by the network of global corporate control, and we know that that's what they've done. And it's simply time to reverse that using Article 5 of the Organic Constitution. And the fact that the legal department, the legal profession, refuses to answer any of these statements to show whether or not this is the case, stonewalling doesn't work at this point. It's time to come up with legal arguments or to admit that you have absolutely no integrity in your profession, one or the other, because enough of us know what's going on. I'm being prompted to wind down, so if you look at the teleprompter, you'll see all of the documentation that the network of global corporate control was trying to hide from you. I hope you will do your homework, and I want to thank you for listening to another segment of the network of global corporate control. We've shown how the network of global corporate control is responding to the fact that it's now in plain view for many of us. Their response and their agents' response to deny this reality is not working for them. We've been discussing the difficulties that the network of global corporate control is having, and those difficulties are going to continue until we take charge. Until next week, I'm your host, Karen Hudis.